Good evening, everyone. It is lovely to have you here. My name is Kyra. I will be your moderator. Just a little bit about myself. I hold a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Delhi, and I'm an incoming master's candidate at the London School of Economics and also the COO at ECB Sustainable Youth Foundation. So lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I start introducing our panelists, I would like to tell you the topic of our panel discussion, and that is empowering tomorrow's leaders, quality education and skill development for a changing world. So basically, access to quality education and skill development is very important for individual growth and social progress, and of course, economic sustainability. But to address the challenges and to explore innovative solutions in this area, this panel will focus on effective strategies, policies, and initiatives to enhance these educational systems and to promote skill acquisition to basically empower young people for this rapidly evolving world. And now I will start with introducing our panel. So let's begin with Siddharth. Siddharth is a multifaceted global figure. He is a first generation technology and entrepreneur, and he got his education at Harvard University. His expertise is in technology, policy, and management. And presently, his pursuits revolve around public policy, where he is committed to the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations headquarters in New York. He also represents India's foreign policy interests on crucial platforms such as the UN General Assembly and the Commission on the Status of Women. And Siddharth's influence also reverberates through multiple international awards, like the Global Leadership Award. He's given a lot of TED Talks, and he channelizes his expertise and vision for a positive change. His profile has been distinguished in publications such as the Hindu and the Economic Times and Forbes India. So it is such an honor to have you today. And next we have Lutfia, who is a policy analyst and a youth activist from South Africa. Her background is in development studies from the University of Johannesburg, and she's a part of the 2023 Global Leadership Program at the State University of New York, University of Buffalo, with the School of Management. And she also has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in International Relations and Political Studies. Her expertise encompasses economics, policy development, theoretical frameworks, and problem solving. She's also a policy advisor in the Education Policy and Advocacy for the All African Students Union. And she's been the regional spokesperson for the South African Students Congress organization. So her international engagements have resulted in a ton of publications on decolonizing education, which is something I'm so excited to discuss today. And she's been also nominated as the South African representative for the GCE Youth Action Group. She is very passionate about humanitarian contributions and aims to create a better future for the global South. And finally, we have Ashlyn from India. Ashlyn is a young economist and a Gen Z changemaker with an interest in human behavioral studies. She started her journey by getting into debate competitions at the very young age of just 11, and now she's an active part of a ton of international organizations, including the UNFCCC Youth Constituency, the UN International Federation of Youth on Water and Climate, the Academic Council of the United Nations Systems, and UN volunteers. And being an army brat from a military background, she takes a lot of interest in military studies, conflicts, and military intelligence. And when she's not doing all of this, she likes to spend her time reading, sketching, painting, and doing photography. So that was all about our panelists. And now that we're familiar with them and their areas of expertise, we can dive straight into our questions. So I will begin with the first round of our questions. And my first question will be to Lutfia. So as a youth leader, you must have experienced the education system firsthand. So what are some of the key barriers you believe are inhibiting young people's access to quality education? And how can local communities play a role in overcoming these challenges?
Greetings to everybody on this session. Greetings to my fellow panelists. Thank you so much, Kara, for having me and for the amazing introduction. Yes, definitely being in the space, being an advocate for education policy and decolonizing free quality education, we have been exposed to the system and its harshness and its deepening inequality. And some of the barriers, I mean, they're endless because we're in a world where inequality, especially within Africa, where inequality just delves so deep. But if I could list a few, I'd say the first thing, like I said, is inequality, in the sense that we need to look at the past of Africa, the past of the global south, that being India as well. What we see is, we've inherited a system that is oppressive in its nature. When I say oppressive in its nature, I refer to the fact that the education system is exclusive to those from a particular class, a particular background, particular gender, particular race, particular language, or level of understanding of a certain, you know, um, skill. And I mean, we have so many students who come from rural areas, who spoke different languages, whose mother tongues are not English, but we're forced to learn in this colonial level of education, which I will get to. The second thing from inequality, so the first one, inequality, the second one, access. When we talk about access, we also need to look at the geographical location of where students are placed and where the tertiary institutes of learning, the primary institutes of learning are based. And in looking at that, we need to ask ourselves, how do we expect a child who, and I mean, education is a basic human right, and how do you expect a child who is under 14 or 15 years old to get to school without proper facilities, proper roads, proper infrastructure, support systems, when these schools are in the urban areas and they're staying within rural areas or villages? And we see this both in Africa and in India, and I'm sure many other global south participants on here will be in agreement of those realities. The third thing, so we have inequality, access, and the third thing I'm taking you to is funding. When we look at funding, education is extremely expensive. And I think that's ridiculous, because education is a basic human right. Our governments need to prioritize investing funding within the sector more so than anything else. Before we look at trade and tourism, before we look at our soft policies, are we actually looking at investing in education, which lays the foundation of how we break this colonial network in globalization? Because for as long as we don't invest in the youth of our countries, we're not investing in the future. And so when we look at funding, we need to look at the absorbent costs of education and how scarce funding is. And, when we reach the point of saying, okay, we're producing funds from the north to the south, are we producing those funds in the most genuine way towards education and towards equality? Or are we producing it once again as a foreign policy tool? And I think Siddharth will build on this as a specialist. When we talk about debt in terms of education, and when we have these global exchange programs, most of the time what we see is a brain drain later down the line. So when we talk about funding, we need to look at it from a genuine perspective of are we actually investing in education? When we talk about north funding to the south, to the global south countries, from a genuine perspective of ensuring that we do sort of, I wouldn't say, deal with the injustices of the past, because I don't think there's a way to undo the harsh histories that we faced as the global southern countries. But are we looking at it to say we are trying to, a form of reparations, if I can put it that way? And then we have neo-colonial factors. So we have inequality. I'm just running us through it one more time so everybody gets the notes. We have inequality, we have access, we have funding. Fourth factor being neo-colonial factors. So when we look at the curriculum, I mean, in South Africa, I'd like to speak on ours specifically. What we see is a very short, and I'm talking about your primary to your secondary school, so within high school level, we see a very limited level of a curriculum that speaks to us, that speaks to our rich histories and our rich cultures. Most of the time within secondary school, within primary school, we're learning about the North, about America's history, about European history, about the world wars. We do not spend enough time on our actual country's history. And I mean, when it comes over to Aslan and to Siddharth, I'd love for them to also mention if generally how they feel about the curriculum. Because what we see in South Africa is there's only about 2 chapters within a whole history textbook, or one even, 2 is if we're pushing it, on actual apartheid and what it did, and our great freedom fighters in South Africa, such as Mandela, such as Winnie Madikizela, such as Steve Biko. We don't learn about this enough at a basic level of a history understanding. And then when I speak to neo-colonial factors, I think also representation. When I walk into a lecture room within my first year of university, am I seeing an Indian South African woman, a Black South African woman, a queer body, uh, a disabled educator, a researcher who's intersectional? Am I identifying myself in my educator? Am I seeing myself in the person teaching me? Or do we still walk into a room or into a faculty and see predominantly male, predominantly white, predominantly, on the upper structure of the hierarchy. So we need to also work around restructuring curriculum in terms of neocolonialism. Number one. Number two, we also need to work around restructuring representation in the educators. Because once again, if I walk into a place and I'm being taught by majority people who do not understand my financial and socioeconomic backgrounds, what are the chances of empathy and support and mental health engagement and the financial engagement or the mentorship that I need to break away from my black tax, which is young people taking money back home while they're studying. Their stipends are going to support a family of 10 because they don't come from anything. And these are the harsh realities. We need to break the cyclical and infrastructural inequality that's systematic. My final factor, before I go to the roles we can play, is unemployment. So we also need to look at, we cannot deal with, like I said, education has very big cost factors. And we come from, in our country's currently unemployment, especially post COVID-19, we can't speak about something like this without looking at the pandemic and its economic impact. And what we saw within COVID-19 was a high rate of unemployment that, it's starking numbers. And when we talk about unemployment, this means families, parents lost jobs, sole care providers and guardians. So where do we then get that support of stipend? And that's still a family who had jobs previously. What about young people who were registered or enrolled in a particular course, who came from this unequal background? And why am I speaking about this? Because all of this stems from colonialism and unequal societies. And what if I was working two jobs as a student to fund this degree or to make a little bit so that I could eat and afford my accommodation or even pay my friend that I'm squatting in their room with? We need to go delve deep into the situation and understand what are these barriers. And these barriers are literally students fighting against all odds, especially Black students. We see this greatly in Africa, and within the All Africa Student Union, we're operating in so many countries. And when you take a walk on campus, which was one of my experiences I'd like to share, we were mobilizing for a protest. So we stayed at campus till odd hours, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, to get past the gates because of security. And we took a walk past the 24-hour library. And what we saw, which was heartbreaking, was students sleeping under tables in libraries, bathing within, trying to wash up within the bathrooms. And it's just inhumane to see a system that continually perpetuates the structural inequality that keeps a few out on the periphery, where some just excel and get, we are the privileged few here on this panel who get to do masters, who get to do honors, who get to join institutes. And we need to actually look at this and say, how am I going back and giving? Okay, now to my solutions. So in terms of solutions, I want us to take a holistic approach in this. Since we have so many stakeholders on here, I hope it's also not just me talking and us also implementing. So we need to look at, number one, private sector funding. All of our big institutes, I mean, we have seen an incline in a lot of intern programs, in a lot of study fellowships, but we need this on a more broader scale. And once again, I think that we need to have priority for those students who come from structural inequality, those students who have intersectional battles, financially, gender, those also whose families may have excluded them because of certain choices in their lives. And that I speak specifically to the queer community, as well as those who may have lost parents who are child-heading households. So I think we need to put more pressure, and this is to my civil society organizations who are listening. We need to place that pressure and hold the baton very high to say we need the private sector to invest and put their money where their mouth is. It's very nice to make a campaign and get 6 students to come in and say we're working with the youth, but are we actually investing in their futures? Then unpaid internships. I have to call this one out. In the height of unemployment, companies earning millions. I think it's really distraught to see unpaid internships at this point. So when we talk about education, we also need experience 20. But in experience, I need transport to get to my internship. I need transport to look decent and formal. And I also need the financing to ensure that my education is utilized in a productive manner. So I think internships need to spread in terms of the private sector. Then to grassroots and NGOs, I touched on it. But what we need is pressure on government, and we need to provide the added support. And when I say added support, whether an NGO can post a social program or a protest or a campaign that we're advocating for, whether it be environmental, gender, education, support young people. A post goes a long way. Join an online session, it goes a long way, seeing good numbers on you. So just doing the simple task as NGOs to spread the word about what we're doing and ensure our narrative is actually true to what it is. Because when we see youth movements, especially for education, we see a lot of it being skewed. I mean, when we saw the fees must fall, especially within South Africa, with Stellenbosch, I'm sure a lot of you know about that movement. What we saw was the media portraying us to be students who are barbaric and just walking in the streets and burning tires and fighting. But no, we did not just wake up and decide we're going to fight. There was a lot of thought behind it as well as, so I'm a beneficiary of the fees must fall movement, but I came later in on the Wits Asila Mali, which was a continuation when the government stopped funding. So that was before my varsity years. And then I stepped in and we created a new movement, or like a revival. So we need to look at, are we helping the students in spreading the message and ensuring that it's true, because the media misconstrues it and makes it look as if students are fighting for education and failing. And the statements your vice chancellors make, it's horrendous sometimes. So what we're asking for as student societies is for this added support from our grassroots and NGOs. Then my biggest one, to the government and the public sector. We really need to now, hit this one, and be honest about it, as hard as it is, an elephant in the room. We as young people within every election, and I don't only see this in Africa and within the All Africa Student Union when we have our debriefs, I also see it within my fellow friends' organizations in different countries. When it's time for government elections, we are fully on the ground, lobbying, moving, ensuring young people are registering, voting. We put everything aside. And I think I expect, and I don't think it's too brave of me to expect, the same commitment and dedication by governments during the time of our need. Misallocation of funds, corruption needs to stop. We need government to invest a bigger portion of their GDP, of their investments into education. We cannot start a bursary scheme in the year of elections and say we are funding students, and then when we reach the next term, all of a sudden they're dropping certain degrees off this funding scheme. It's not going to work. We need the governments within all countries in the global south to ensure that we are funding in a manner that is sustainable, number one. Number two, that is equal and efficient.
So, my question for you is that
Right.
empowering individuals with skills requires aligning education with market demand. So, how can we structure a curriculum and training programs in a way that is adaptable to industry trends while also fostering creativity and thinking?
Right, Kyra. So thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Hope I am audible to Lutfia, Kyra, Aslin, and all the participants. How do you design a curriculum that is relevant to market trends, right? I think, so this is a question that has been lingering for a very long time. It's something we call as the industry academia gap. And so one of the ways that can be done, and it has been done for almost the last 5 to 10 years, ever since the education system became more woke. Students became more they had that sense of accountability, and with the entire millennial generation and the entire online revolution around it, a lot of things have improved. So one of the first things is to get as many industry people as you can as part of the decision making process. So one of the biggest challenges why the academic structure lacked, or there was a lack of communication between the industry and the academic side, is because largely in a country like India, for many years, the academic side worked in a very textbookish fashion. They just focused on literature. A lot of people, in fact, you won't believe, there are so many people who have a PhD in management, PhD in public policy, all of these domains, but then they don't know basic tools. If you ever question a PhD professor in a central government university, they will have an issue with basic things like what tools do tech people use, what tools do management people use. Something as common as Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or Zoom. I mean, they had a problem during the pandemic. We all witnessed that, right? Similarly, I mean, most academic people are still stuck at Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel, and they think that's like a lot of technical expertise. So that is one issue that we need to raise. That it's time we raise the bar for the academic cohort, and in doing so, we need to make sure that a lot of industry people are part of that academic discussion. So through guest lectures, through all of these interactions, we can try and reduce that gap. Now, when we talk of designing a curriculum, well, that is a long process. I'm sure you are aware of something called as the NEP, the National Education Policy, that was launched in 2020. Now, that was a milestone move of the government. I've been a part of the policy process for it, so I can vouch for it that it does incorporate a lot of industry relevant trends. The fact that today a lot of academic institutions are okay with letting students choose electives from as random as physics with Sanskrit. That is something that's actually happening in class 11th and 12th in most schools in India today. So you can actually choose very random electives and still combine them together and make a domain for yourself. So I think that's absolutely fair to do, because that's how you work at the intersection of a lot of complex disciplines. That's where what they call as multi domain expertise or interdisciplinary expertise comes into play. So I think that is one area we need to work on, trying to improve interdisciplinary areas. Like, imagine when we talk of public policy and another G20 platform, the very fact that even though public policy is like the backbone of administration, of foreign policy and everything, you won't find a lot of people with accurate knowledge of what public policy is. You won't find a lot of people from the academic domain. It's so many times it has happened that people have come to me and asked me, sir, is there a direct program for public policy? Is there a direct course on public administration? So these things are still, in an interdisciplinary gray area. That is what we need to solve for. Also, apart from solving that gray area, I feel there are so many disciplines. Anthropology, for instance, social anthropology forms the entire basis of what we call as public policy today. But again, that is not being taught formally. So, introduction of informal yet interdisciplinary areas into your academic curriculum is one way to achieve that. Obviously, interaction with a lot of industry partners is essential. Making industry people a part of the decision making process, like what we did with the national education policy, that is one way to accomplish it. And in totality, I feel somewhere we need to mix a lot of ideas from the public, because it is the student population that has to take the country forward. So if it's like you are not letting the end stakeholder of the entire process be a part of the process. Students have never had a voice. Students have never been consulted, like if this is what they want to do. So that is very essential. Stakeholder input in terms of the end user, the end customer, which in this case is the student, that needs to be taken care of. A lot of that is still pending. The NEP, in my opinion, had a lot of great industry veterans. It had Sam Pitroda talking that we need a telecommunications course on in class 11th, and all of these great people talking, Nandan Nilekani, and then Chandrasekharan of TCS mentioning that there should be an industry allied course that prepares people for a career in telecom engineering or IT. So IT course needs to be well structured. All of these great people talking. But then the sad part is I did not see one single student in that entire communication process actually saying that will this work or will this not work. So we need to make the end stakeholder, the end customer, a part of the process. That is one way we can try and solve for this area, where when essentially the question is about the industry academia gap. So we need to solve for it. It's an ongoing process. The good part is it has begun with a lot of activism, with a lot of with the advent of internet over the last 10 years. I mean, internet existed since 1997 in everybody's homes, but then I guess in the last 10 years it has come to everybody's palms through smartphones. So I guess that entire revolution has taken the academic experience on a different level. And especially with COVID, in a lot of ways, COVID was an opportunity, if you think of it, because it accelerated this process of online education. So that's when people realized that there are so many avenues through which you can improve concept of designing curriculum with a lot of relevance with current industry trends. So yes, it does. It is a very burning issue. I face it every day. We all face it every day. I'm sure Lufti has also seen it during hiring processes. A lot of kids are still not able to, get the kind of exposure they should during their college years. And it is like she mentioned a point around internships. That is something very relevant. Internships still, I mean, they say that college level internships are like the friend zone of the corporate world. So they want you, but they won't pay you. So that is still something that is going on. However, a lot of companies have come forward, especially during COVID. I saw Google, Apple, Microsoft, all of them come forward and say that they were ready to pay a lot of kids who were in their third year to do something around the developer platform and essentially become an extended part of the community and thereafter join the company. So these were backdoor entry mechanisms for a lot of companies that did evolve. But then, yes, I feel largely the curriculum will only change when students are made a part of the academic process. So there needs to be a more structured student body, such as Changemakers 20. A lot of these forums have come up around G20, right? So the process is that the G20 Secretariat in Delhi is identifying student representatives from various bodies such as this, and then putting them together so that the NEP can be refined. Because I think at the end of the day, it's the student community who needs to decide what will work and what won't work. So that is something that's the easiest way we can try and bridge this gap and create a curriculum that is more at par with industry trends and industry requirements.
Right, thank you so much for your answer. And I love how you shed light on involving students. It's really important. And as a student myself, I feel like that would be a great opportunity to have much higher quality of education and to get exactly what we want from our degrees if that were allowed. And I'm really glad that it's become big. So now that Ashley is here, let's get to her question. I will repeat it once again so that all of us are on the same page. So, Ashley, my question to you was that it's very difficult to access quality education in low and middle income countries. So, are there any policy approaches that you might have come across that can bridge the gap between privileged and underprivileged communities?
So some of the policies where I think which can effectively bridge the gap between privileged and unprivileged communities can be, peer-to-peer learning networks. That is something that students can do with students, right? So creating peer-to-peer learning networks can empower students to support each other's learning. Privileged students can act as mentors to underprivileged peers, fostering a sense of community and collaboration. And then there can also be open educational resources, developing and sharing open educational resources such as textbooks, lesson plans, and multimedia content, which can significantly lower the cost of quality education materials and make them accessible to a wider range of students. Like Lutfia pointed out, that we do not have the basic facilities to even reach our educational institutions. So I think this is a really important policy that can play a good role. And then we can also come to community learning centers, where we can establish communities learning centers in underserved areas can serve as hubs for education, skill development, and adult education programs, fostering lifelong learning opportunities for both children and adults. Because that is also a part of quality education. It goes irrespective of age and gender, and it focuses on an equal platform for everyone to learn. And then we can also have alternative assessment methods, which is moving away from traditional exam based assessments to more practical and project based evaluations, which can cater to diverse learning systems and talents, reducing the disadvantage some underprivileged students might face in exam oriented systems. Dual vocational training is also one of the policies which I think can be implemented, where combining vocational skills training with formal education can prepare students for specific job opportunities, enhancing employability and bridging the gap between education and the workforce, which is something I would actually advocate for, since I am a student myself and I have friends who are doing vocational training, and I realize the problems that they come across and the difficulties they face. And Apart from that, like how Siddharth sir brought to a point that we need social anthropology in our curriculum, right? So I think, yeah, culturally relevant curriculum is really important. We're developing curriculum that is relevant to the local culture and context can engage students more effectively and make learning more meaningful, especially for underprivileged communities. That is something I can say I've experienced firsthand as a military child who has gone towards the extreme north, extreme east, extreme west, and the extreme south of the country. And then we can also have public private partnership for school infrastructure, which where we can collaborate with private sector entities to build and maintain social infrastructure, which can help governments to overcome resource constraints and ensure that underprivileged communities have an access to suitable learning environments. And then I think one of the most important policies that can be put in place is financial literacy education, where integrating financial literacy education into the curriculum can empower students from underprivileged communities with essential skills for managing personal finances and making informed decisions. And I think this is something I used to joke a lot about in my high school. Like, what is the school teaching me for exactly? How am I gonna handle my taxes, right? And that is something financial literacy came very late to me in my college years. So this is something I'd advocate personally as well. And then apart from that, I think we can have a home based early childhood education, which involves providing resources and training for parents in underprivileged communities to engage in early childhood education at home, which can lay a strong foundation for children's learning. It can play a really, really important role because, it will shape a child's personality right from home and not just entirely dependent on the school, where at times parents do not even feel connected to their children, who are students, because they do not exactly know what they're learning. And that creates a lot of hostile environment and conflict between the teachers and and the parents as well. So I think this can be started, home based early childhood education. And I'm honestly delighted to share how an organization has managed to create a sustainable impact despite limited resources. We understand the importance of innovative strategies and approaches in overcoming resource constraints and have implemented effective measures to maximize our reach and effectiveness. Allow me to highlight some examples of the innovative strategies, approaches we have adopted to overcome these limitations and make a significant difference in our initiatives. One of the things that we did was, okay, resource optimization. We adopt a resource optimization approach in our operations. This involves carefully planning and allocation of resources to ensure their efficient and effective utilization. We prioritize activities and projects that have the highest potential for impact while minimizing wastage and unnecessary expenses. By making strategic choices and optimizing our resources, we are able to achieve maximum impact within our limitations. And the another one would be knowledge and skill sharing initiatives, where we believe in the power of knowledge and skill sharing to empower individuals and communities through workshops, training programs, and mentorship initiatives. We enable young people to acquire the necessary knowledge and skills to become sustainability advocates and change makers. By investing in capacity building, we create a multiplier effect where individuals empowered by our programs go on to create positive change within their own communities, amplifying our impact beyond our direct reach. And the third thing that we are able to do is collaborative partnerships, where we actively seek partnerships and collaborations with like minded organizations, leveraging their expertise, resources, and networks. By pooling our resources together, we are able to create synergistic effects and achieve a much greater impact. These partnerships enable us to share costs, access additional funding opportunities, and tap into existing infrastructures, thereby maximizing the outcomes of our initiatives. And apart from these strategies, I would also like to draw your attention to one of the instances that showcase our innovative approach to overcome scarcity of resources. Earlier this year, we started running a capacity building program for climate vulnerable communications in East Africa. During the program, we discovered that the digital penetration was just 10% in many communities, and the internet connectivity was unreliable. So people used WhatsApp very judiciously, as the internet could cost as much as $4 a week. So in response to these challenges, we came up with an innovative solution, and carefully ideated and designed a course that could be delivered over text messages on WhatsApp. By leveraging the popularity of WhatsApp and utilizing these text messages, we were able to bridge the gap and reach communities that previously couldn't access traditional learning materials and resources. This approach allowed us to deliver valuable knowledge and skills directly to individuals' mobile phones, overcoming the limitations of internet access and affordability. Through this innovative strategy, we not only maximized our impact but also ensured that the marginalized communities were included and empowered in our capacity building efforts. This instance highlights our organization's commitment to thinking creatively and finding alternative ways to deliver our initiatives effectively, even in resource-constrained environments. By adapting our approach to specific needs and limitations of the communities we serve, we can actually achieve meaningful results and create positive change, regardless of resource constraints.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Ashlyn. I love your answer, and I love how you gave us specific instances and real life examples because it's always good to see people practicing what they preach. So, with this, as much as I would love to go on and ask a couple more questions, we are short on time. So, with this, I would like to end the panel. Thank you so much, Siddharth, Lutfia, and Ashlyn, for joining us today. I had a lovely time with all of you, and I just learned so many valuable things today. Thank you, everyone.